My father, Captain Carl Franklin Keener Jr., joined the Navy at age 16. He was stationed in Australia and fought in World War II on the USS Bonefish. Unfortunately, the USS Bonefish sunk on June 18, 1945, when the Japanese attacked. My father was one of the only surviving crew members from his submarine because he was sick and had to stay in Australia when the USS Bonefish left for its last patrol. At age 29, he started a dangerous career as a Chesapeake Bay pilot. I remember him telling me about climbing a temporary ladder that hung over the side of a huge cargo ship all the way to the top deck from a pilot boat launch that was close to water level, in all kinds of weather, including bad storms. He navigated ships up and down the Chesapeake Bay, and some of these trips took over 14 hours due to the slow speed of the ships. He was often gone for 2 or 3 days at a time, and then was home for a few days. He worked strange hours, and often was asleep during the day. His career was long, and he retired at age 65. I remember when he first started having memory troubles, he was 78 years old. Once he took the car to get gas and didn't come back for 8 hours. The police were called to help us find him, and he was dismayed when he arrived home to find the police and an upset wife, because in his mind he had only been gone a few minutes. We learned that he would take the car out and forget where he was going, and then get lost. Soon, he couldn't be left alone for very long. He started going to an adult daycare so my mother could get support and run errands. He really didn't like that much and gave her a hard time about it. This phase was most upsetting and emotionally draining. This is my mother's story about my Grandy, but my story is different. My earliest memories of my Grandy was in my grandparents' house in Timonium. I remember kneeling down in the dining room, struggling to tie my shoes, until my Grandy walked in and taught me how. The first memory of his decline is the story of when he went to Home Depot and on returning to his car called the police because someone stole it. Only someone didn't steal his car. He forgot where he parked it and was looking in the wrong parking lot. At that point, he lost his right to drive his car because it was becoming a danger to himself and other drivers. This issue continued for the next year because he started sneaking out to go for a drive. The next thing I remember was waking up to my sister telling me he had fallen down the stairs at our beach house and was being rushed to the hospital. I can still remember the smell of the hospital and saying goodbye to him as though it would be the last time I saw him alive. My family fought over what was best for him, not wanting to have the stress of caring for him, as well as the possibility of him never recovering from his injuries. After he pulled through, he had a long road to recovery with countless physical therapy visits and was relocated to an assisted living facility. Since he never was able to recover and the Alzheimer's was changing him, he had a hard time remembering most things. I remember visiting him in the nursing home, and his face when he smiled at me in a friendly way, accompanied by the wonder of, "Are you going to introduce yourself?" My mother said to him, "Do you know who that is?" And he responded his head by shaking no. That's when I had the heartbreaking realization that he had no clue who I was. Not only had this disease taken his memory of me away, but it also changed me. I became selfish because I refused to visit him when I had the chance. My family was stressing about his care and visiting him, and I was avoiding him to save my feelings. What really mattered in this situation was spending time with him while he still had the time, because you can never get back lost time with loved ones. The last years of his life were stressful and painful for the entire family. Before his accident, his Alzheimer's was hard on my granny because there were things she didn't know how to do and counted on him to do. But he couldn't do them anymore because he couldn't remember how or was incapable. In return, she was angry with him. After his accident, everyone was unsure if he would pull through his injuries. This was especially upsetting and taxing on everyone's emotions because he was in a coma and barely hanging on. Once he did make it through, it was a battle to work with his needs while he stayed in the nursing home. By that point, everyone had already come to terms with his memory loss, and he could only remember events from the past. Whenever family would visit, they could only talk about his war days and when his daughters were young. Unfortunately, due to his accident, he had damage in his throat that made him need physical therapy, but he couldn't work with a therapist because of his memory difficulties, and he never regained the ability to swallow properly. In the nursing home, he was on a feeding tube, but he would regularly sneak food. This was especially frustrating for family because we had to keep explaining to him that he couldn't have food. Since he couldn't swallow properly, he would aspirate the food into his lungs and have to be sent to the hospital. Eventually, because of all the stress to his lungs, they were too weak to support him anymore. He passed away on August 5th, 2012.